Collective identities brings in society by attachment a marvelous type of conflict in which each side thinks of the other side as a hated enemy, and there is a tendency to exaggerate the virtues of one side as well as the views of the other side. It is a kind of decision and derivation that grips the minds of people involved in such conflicts. Almost similar happens when two nations are at war, as patriots in each nation see other as the enemy aggressor, and each side believes that God and truth are on their side. Now, communities, nations and nation states. Number 1, state. State refers to an abstract entity consisting of a set of political legal institutions claiming control over a particular territory and the people living in it. So, state is an abstract entity. It has certain set of political legal institutions which control a particular territory and the people living in it. Max Weber stated that a state is a body that successfully claims a monopoly of legitimate force in a particular territory. According to Max Weber, it is a body which claims a monopoly of legal type enforced in a particular territory. In modern industrial capitalist societies, power is centralized in the institution of a state and dispersed among its citizens. In the capitalist modern society, all the powers are centralized in the institution of a state and then they are dispersed to the citizens. In the opinion of Max Weber, the state as a rural community that successfully claims the monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. Thus, the state is one of the important agencies of social control whose functions are carried by means of law, backed by ultimately by physical force. So, any control imposed on a particular territory and the people living in it by means of law and backed by ultimate physical force is said to be a state. A state is characterized by few elements, that is population, territory, government and sovereignty. State has population, a fixed territory, a government and sovereignty. It also requires international recognition. The state grows out of a particular historical process in response to the issue of legislation of power and integration of power arrangements. So there is a historical process through which the evaluation of the state takes place. The issue of legislation of power and integration of power arrangements. The state grows out of a particular historical process in response to the issue of legislation of power and integration of power arrangements. So there is a historical process of evolution of a state, and there are certain happenings of integration of power arrangements that are done to create a state. To mention an orderly system of social relations, people have to be subjected to some degree of discipline, and the people are subjected to a degree of discipline, then only a proper control of the state can be done. This discipline is in an ordered society or state need not always come from an external agency like the police, army or judiciary. And for this, the police, army and judiciary are not only the institutions which is applied, there are many other things also. It may come as a result of voluntary acceptance of the norms and values of the society or the constitution of the state by people themselves. If the people start accepting the norms and the values of the society and the constitution themselves, then the police and other external agencies like the police, army and the judiciary may not be used to control the state. Then the second one is your nation. Nation is an entity difficult to define. It is a bit complicated matter to define a nation. State was conceived in culturally neutral terms, and the nation was also conceived as an inclusive territorial political community of all citizens. So state is said to be culturally neutral, but a nation is said to be an inclusive territorial political community of all citizens. Nation building was viewed mainly as a state-driven process of economic development and social transformation. Building a nation is an economic development process and social transformation process. The expectation was that the universalization of citizenship rights and the induction of cultural pluralities into the democratic process of open and competitive policies would evolve new civic questions among ethnic communities and between them and the state. So the expectations was that there will be a universalization of citizenship rights and the induction of cultural pluralities into democratic process of open and competitive policies would evolve new equations among ethnic communities and between them and the state. A nation state refers to a cultural group that lives within a political system willing and is bound by moral sentiments and powerful bonds. Nation is an assumption that can sustain or remain as nation, that is the largest community with the sweet cohesion of nationality, that is its abstract form. So nationality is the abstract form of a nation, and a nation is created with the assumption that there will be a sustainable growth or it will remain as nation with a largest community and sweet cohesion of nationality. It is only power that prevents cultural diversity from its conversion into cultural challenges. The power prevents cultural diversity from conversion to cultural challenges. Mutual trust, support and identification of communities interwoven with it can only give a nation its everlasting existence. And if there is a mutual trust and support and identification of communities which are interconnected to each other, then only it is possible to create a nation for a longer period of which will exist for a longer period of time. As a native in an aspiration of its member communities, it is difficult to define a nation. It is like a breathing air that requires a state of its manifestation. There are nations found on the basis of common culture, cultural, historical, and political institutions, but it is hard to come up with any defining features, that is, any characteristic that a nation must possess. It is difficult to define a nation because a nation is a peculiar sort of community that is easy to describe but hard to define. We can describe many nations founded on the basis of common cultural historical institutions like a shared religion, language, ethnicity, history, or regional culture, but it is hard to come up with any defining feature of nation. We can say that it is very difficult to define a nation because in a nation there are different things that are taken together. We can very easily say about the historical institutions, the culture of a particular place, the religion, language, ethnicity, history, or regional cultures that creates a particular, that are followed in a particular territory. But it is very difficult to define a nation. For every possible criteria, there are exceptions and counter examples. For example, there are many nations that do not share a common language, religion, ethnicity, and so on. On the other hand, there are many languages, religion, ethnicities that are shared across nations. But this does not lead to transformation of a single united nation.